Their uncle threw them away because they were girls. 10 years later, this happened. The sun had just risen over the quiet town of Enugu when loud voices echoed from the grand mansion at the end of Odenigbo Street. Inside the sitting room stood 3 girls, their eyes wide with fear and confusion. Their uncle, Uncle Dominic, stood before them, face hard, lips tight, and arms crossed. "I said, pack your things and leave this house," he barked. Ada, the oldest at 18, stepped forward. Her eyes were red from crying, but she tried to keep her voice steady. "But, Uncle, this is our father's house. He built it with his own hands. Where do you want us to go?" Uncle Dominic's face twisted. "Your father is dead. May his soul rest in peace, but girls like you don't inherit property. It is against our tradition. This house now belongs to me as the only surviving man in this family." Beside Ada, Chisholm, 15, clutched her younger sister's hand tightly. Nosy, just 13, was trembling. She didn't understand everything, but she could feel the fear in her sister's silence. "Please, Uncle," Chisholm pleaded. "We don't have anywhere to go. We've lost our father. You are the only family we have left." Uncle Dominic shook his head without pity. "That is not my problem. I have tried. I fed you for 2 weeks after the burial. Is it food you came here to eat forever? Leave my house today or I'll call the police." Tears rolled down Nosy's cheeks. She turned to Ada. "Sister, are we really going to sleep outside?" Ada bent down and hugged her. Her heart was heavy. She wished her mother was still alive. Their mother had died 4 years earlier from illness, and since then their father had been everything to them. He worked hard to raise his girls and had often told them, "No matter what anyone says, you are enough. This house is your home." But now their own uncle, their father's younger brother, was throwing them out like strangers. "I don't want to repeat myself again," Uncle Dominic shouted. He stormed off to his room and returned with a black bag. He tossed it at their feet. "These are your things. I already told the driver to take you to the village if you don't leave peacefully. I'm giving you 30 minutes. Tears rolled down Nosy's cheeks. She turned to Ada. "Sister, are we really going to sleep outside?" Ada bent down and hugged her. Her heart was heavy. She wished her mother was still alive. Their mother had died 4 years earlier from illness, and since then their father had been everything to them. He worked hard to raise his girls and had often told them, "No matter what anyone says, you are enough. This house is your home." But now their own uncle, their father's younger brother, was throwing them out like strangers. "I don't want to repeat myself again," Uncle Dominic shouted. He stormed off to his room and returned with a black bag. He tossed it at their feet. "These are your things. I already told the driver to take you to the village if you don't leave peacefully. I'm giving you 30 minutes. The girls stood there in shock. Ada opened the bag. It contained only a few clothes, none of them theirs. Uncle Dominic had packed random items without care. "I'll handle this," Ada whispered. She led her sisters outside and sat them on the front steps. "Where could we go?" Chisholm asked. "Daddy's friends? Maybe they'll help." Ada nodded slowly. "We can try, but we have to stick together. No matter what, we will not beg him. We will survive this." Just then, a small white car pulled into the compound. It was the driver Uncle Dominic had called. He stepped out, looking ashamed. "Sisters, I don't agree with what he's doing," he said quietly, "but he asked me to drop you off anywhere you say. I can take you to your aunt's place in Nasuka." Ada sighed. Their aunt was poor and already had 5 children. She would take them in, but it would be hard. Still, it was better than the street. "Okay, let's go," Ada said. She picked up the small bag and helped Nosy into the car. As they drove away, the girls looked back at the mansion, their father's mansion, that now belonged to a man who saw no value in them. Ada wiped her eyes and whispered, "One day we'll come back here, and when we do, it will be as women no one can throw away." The car disappeared into the distance, leaving behind 3 broken-hearted girls, a locked gate, and a cruel uncle who thought their story had ended. But it was only the beginning. Life in Suka was not easy for the three sisters. Their aunt, Auntie Ifioma, welcomed them with open arms, but her small house was already full. She had 5 children of her own, and her husband was a mechanic who barely earned enough to feed the family. The sisters had to sleep on a mat in the corner of the sitting room and eat whatever was available. But still, it was better than the street. Ada, now 18, knew she had to do something quickly. She could not allow her sisters to suffer. After 2 weeks, she got a job as a housemaid for a family that lived nearby. The pay was small, but she accepted it without complaint. "I will save every kobo," she told herself. "I will make sure my sisters go to school." Chisholm, the 15-year-old, was quiet but smart with her hands. She noticed a woman who sold clothes by the roadside and often stayed long hours sewing with a small machine. One afternoon, she approached her. "Please, Ma, I want to learn how to sew. I don't have money, but I can help you clean or run errands." The woman, Madam Esther, looked at her closely. "What's your name, child?" "Chisholm." "You have the eyes of a determined girl. Come tomorrow. You'll start by sweeping the shop." And so Chisholm began learning tailoring, slowly, painfully, but she never missed a day. She cleaned, fetched water, and watched closely as Madam Esther cut and sewed beautiful dresses. Nosy, the youngest, was just 13 and still needed school. Their aunt helped register her at the local public school, and though the classroom was crowded and the books were torn, Nosy loved learning. At night, under the dim light of a kerosene lamp, she would read aloud to her sisters from old textbooks she borrowed from school. "We will be somebody one day," she often said. "Daddy believed in us. We can't let his dream die." Years passed. Slowly, things began to change. Ada was noticed by the family she worked for. One day, their son saw her reading a big book during her break. "You read this?" he asked, surprised. "Yes," she said. "I finished secondary school before our father died. I just couldn't go to university." The boy told his parents, and after some weeks, they helped Ada apply for a scholarship to study abroad. When she got it, she couldn't believe it. "Ada, you're going to London!" Auntie Ifioma shouted, dancing around the small sitting room. Ada hugged her sisters tightly. "I'm going for us all. One day we'll all rise." In London, Ada studied nursing. She worked part-time, saved money, and sent some back home every month. She called her sisters every Sunday. Chisholm grew into a talented fashion designer. Madam Esther, impressed by her dedication, gave her a small sewing machine after her 3rd year of training. With Ada's support, Chisholm opened a tiny shop beside the road. She called it Chi Designs. Nosy, always the dreamer, joined the church choir and soon became known for her sweet voice. She began writing songs and uploading her music online with the help of a kind pastor. One of her songs went viral, and soon people started booking her for church events. From that small house in Suka, 3 girls were rising. One day, after nearly 10 years, the sisters gathered in Ada's new house in Lagos. It was a big moment. They hadn't all been together in one place in years. Ada looked at her sisters with pride. "Remember what Uncle Dominic said?" "He said we had no inheritance," Chisholm replied. Nosy shook her head. "But we inherited something far better, our father's strength." They laughed and hugged each other tightly. Then Ada brought out an envelope. "What's that?" Chisholm asked. Ada smiled. "Something I found during my last visit home. Our father's real will, the one Uncle Dominic hid from us." They all gasped. Ada looked at them seriously. "It's time to go back." Their eyes met, full of courage. This time, they were not scared girls anymore. They were women, and they were ready. The black SUV pulled up to the old gate of their father's mansion. The building still stood tall and beautiful, but the compound looked dry and unkept. Weeds had grown through the cracks of the tiles, and the paint on the walls had started to fade. Ada stepped out of the car first. She wore a fitted black suit and held a brown file in her hand. Behind her, Chisholm wore a long yellow dress she had sewn herself. Ngozi, now 23, wore a simple white blouse and jeans. Her face was calm, but her eyes were sharp. The security man at the gate looked confused. "Yes? Who are you looking for?" Ada turned to him. "Please tell Uncle Dominic that his nieces are here." The man blinked. Wait, Ada? Chisholm? Ngozi? Yes, Ada replied. We're back. Moments later, the gate opened slowly. Uncle Dominic stepped out of the house in a worn-out shirt. He looked older, thinner, and more tired than they remembered. His eyes widened in shock when he saw them. You? He said, almost choking on the word. What are you doing here? Ada walked forward calmly. We came to take back what belongs to us. He laughed bitterly. What belongs to you? This is still my house. I've lived here for 10 years. You girls lost that right long ago. Chisholm stepped forward. No, Uncle, you stole this house from us. But we have proof now, our father's real will. She handed him a copy of the document. He snatched it, scanned through, and his face went pale. This can't be real. It is, Ada said. You thought you destroyed the only copy, but our father was wiser than you. He gave one to his lawyer, and I found it last year. The will clearly stated that the house and everything in it belonged to the 3 daughters. Uncle Dominic was never mentioned. That lawyer is dead, he shouted. He can't say anything now. Ngozi smiled gently. But his assistant is alive, and we already went to court. We didn't come here for a fight. We came with a court order. She handed the security man a folder. Here, you can read it yourself. The house is now legally ours. Uncle Dominic must leave. The man opened it slowly and nodded. It's true, sir. This paper has the government stamp. Uncle Dominic sat down slowly on the steps of the house. His hands shook. Everything I worked for, gone. Ada looked at him, her voice soft. You didn't work for this. You stole it from us when we were just children. We suffered while you enjoyed what wasn't yours. He looked up at them with watery eyes. Where do you expect me to go now? I have no money. No one wants to help me anymore. There was silence. Then Chisholm stepped forward. You threw us out without mercy. You didn't care if we slept on the street. But we are not like you. Ada nodded. We won't throw you to the street, Uncle. You can stay in the boys' quarters for now, until you find somewhere to go. But you must never try to take what is not yours again. Uncle Dominic looked down in shame. I'm sorry, he whispered. Ngozi walked past him and opened the front door of the mansion. Sunlight poured into the hallway. The girls entered slowly, looking around the home that held so many memories. The chairs were different, the walls were repainted, but it still felt like home. They walked into their father's old study. It was dusty, but untouched. Ada ran her fingers over the books. He would have been proud of us, she said. Chisholm nodded. We didn't just survive, we grew. Ngozi picked up a small photo frame of their parents. She held it close to her chest. We came back, stronger, wiser, and together. That evening, as the sun set over Enugu, news began to spread. 3 girls once thrown out of their father's house had returned, not in tears, but in triumph. A local journalist captured their story, and soon the internet was flooded with messages of support and praise. These girls are proof that women are not weak. Their uncle said they had no inheritance, but they built their own empire. And just like that, a story that began in pain ended with power, grace, and justice. But for Ada, Chisholm, and Ngozi, this was not the end. It was only the beginning of something greater.
The once proud Uncle Dominic sat alone in the boys' quarters of the mansion he used to call his own. The air inside was stale. The walls were bare. The mattress on the floor sagged in the middle, and the single window let in more mosquitoes than breeze. Every sound from the main house reminded him of what he had lost. The laughter of the girls, now women, echoed through the compound like thunder in his ears. He had expected them to throw him out in revenge. Instead, they allowed him to stay, but the generosity stung more than hatred ever could. Each day, Ada walked past him in her fitted black suits, calm and successful. Chisholm drove in and out with clients visiting her for fittings. Nosy songs played softly on the car radio every morning as she left for church rehearsals. It was more than his pride could handle. One morning, as he washed the single shirt he had left, 2 neighbors passed by and whispered loudly, "Is that not Uncle Dominic, the same man that threw his nieces out? Now look at him." He turned away, hands trembling. Shame had settled on him like a second skin. It was everywhere, in the way people looked at him, and how the maidguard at the gate no longer stood to greet him, and how even the gardener pretended not to notice him. By the end of the week, he had made his decision. He would leave. He packed the little he owned into a torn travel bag and scribbled a note on the back of a torn calendar page. "Thank you for your kindness, but I cannot stay. I am going to the village. Uncle Dominic." He left the note on a plastic stool outside the boys' quarters and slipped away at dawn. The journey to the village was quiet and painful. As the rickety bus bounced over potholes, Dominic stared out the window, haunted by memories. He remembered when he used to drive his brother's car to this same village, full of pride, boasting to the elders about the family mansion in Enugu. Now he returned with nothing. When he finally arrived at the family compound, the gate was open, but the silence was unnerving. He knocked gently on the wooden door of the elder's hut. One of the cousins, now the oldest man in the family, opened it. His eyes widened in surprise, but not the kind Dominic hoped for. "You came," the elder said. His tone was not warm. "I had to," Dominic replied, his voice shaky. "I've lost everything." The elder nodded slowly. "We heard." That evening, a meeting of the village elders was called. The compound was filled with men, gray-haired, weathered by time, and full of quiet wisdom. Dominic sat in their midst, his hands folded in his lap. The eldest among them, a man called Paul Corey, cleared his throat. "Dominic," he began, "we received word of what happened in Enugu. Is it true that you threw your brother's daughters out after his death?" Dominic looked down. "Yes, but No need to explain," another elder cut in. "You dishonored your brother's memory. He was a good man. He raised those girls alone after their mother passed, and you, his own blood, treated them like orphans without a name." "They were children, Dominic," Paul Corey said sternly. "You threw them to the street." Dominic's eyes welled with tears. "I thought I was following tradition. That property, it should have come to me." A heavy silence followed. Then Paul Corey stood. "A man who hides behind culture to commit cruelty is no man at all. You are no longer welcome at our gatherings. From today, you are banned from every family meeting, every community council, every celebration or burial in this village. Your name will not be called at any roll. You have brought shame upon our bloodline." Dominic gasped. "You can't do that. I have nowhere else to go." "We didn't send you away," another elder said coldly. "Your own heart did. Now you must live with what you've done." Dominic collapsed to his knees. "Please, I have no one." "That's what you left those girls to feel," Paul Corey replied. "And still, they rose without you." The meeting ended without ceremony. As the elders stood and walked away, no one looked back. Dominic remained on his knees long after the compound emptied. The full weight of what he had done and what he had lost finally settled on him. He had gambled his family for pride, and in return, he earned a legacy of shame. The road to Nsukka had never felt shorter. It had been nearly 10 years since the sisters last stepped foot in the dusty streets of their aunt's compound. But this time, they didn't arrive in tears or shame. They came in grace, dressed in fine clothes and riding in 2 black SUVs. The once timid girls who had left the village in a driver's car now returned as women of dignity, success, and purpose. Inside the house, Aunt Ifoma was in the kitchen stirring a pot of okra soup when one of her children rushed in. "Mommy, cars have come, big ones!" She wiped her hands on a wrapper and hurried to the door, heart pounding. She hadn't received any visitors in years, especially not the kind who came in air-conditioned jeeps. And then she saw them. Ada, radiant in a navy blue jumpsuit, stepping out of the first SUV with her arms open wide. Behind her, Chisom emerged, wearing a mustard yellow gown she had sewn herself. And from the second vehicle, Nosi came down last, clutching a bouquet of fresh flowers and beaming with joy. "Auntie Ifoma!" Nosi cried out. For a long second, Aunt Ifoma stood frozen, lips trembling, tears threatening. Then she ran toward them, arms flung wide. They met in the middle of the compound, collapsing into a long, tearful hug that said everything words never could. "My babies," she whispered, touching their cheeks like a mother reunited with her lost children. "Look at you. You kept your promise." They took her inside and presented gifts, bags of groceries, new wrappers, a smartphone, and an envelope thick with cash. But that was just the beginning. That evening, as they sat on plastic chairs under the mango tree, Ada spoke. "Auntie, we didn't come just to say thank you. We came to take you with us. You're not staying here anymore." Aunt Ifoma blinked, unsure she had heard right. "Me? Go where?" "To Lagos," Chisom said gently. "We've built a home there. You'll live with us." "But my children, your uncle, our life is here." "We're taking all of you," Nosi added quickly. "Your 5 children already have spots in good schools, private schools, no more broken benches and torn notebooks." "And uncle?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Ada smiled softly. "He's going to be offered a job, logistics coordinator in a transport company I invested in. The salary will cover rent, food, everything." Aunt Ifoma covered her mouth with both hands. Her shoulders shook as she began to cry. Deep, uncontrollable sobs from a heart that had never expected this kind of reward. "You girls," she gasped between tears. "I only did what any mother would do. I couldn't watch my brother's children suffer."
"And because of that, our lives changed," Ada said, her own voice shaky. "You sheltered us when no one else would. You gave us your home, your food, your love. Now we want to give you the same." Within a week, the family relocated to Lagos. Their new home was a 2-story duplex in a quiet, gated estate. Auntie Foma was given the master bedroom with her own private bathroom and a view of the garden. Her wardrobe was stocked with brand new clothes, many of them custom-made by Chisom. She didn't have to lift a finger in the kitchen unless she wanted to. A cleaner came twice a week. Nosi ordered her favorite soup from a local restaurant every Sunday after church. And for the first time in her life, Auntie Foma had peace. Her husband, now employed and earning well, began to walk with pride. He bought new tools for his trade, opened a small repair center, and started training apprentices. Their children blossomed in school. Her first son was quickly identified as a math genius and enrolled in a scholarship program. Her daughter joined the school's culinary club and dreamed of becoming a chef. Auntie Foma herself became a quiet symbol of grace. In church, she sat proudly beside her 3 daughters, as she now called them. People whispered about how lucky she was, but she always corrected them. "It's not luck, it's love returned." One day, during a family dinner, Ada raised a glass. "To the woman who never gave up on us, to our second mother, to our miracle." They all raised their glasses, and Auntie Foma wiped her eyes. "I never asked for a reward," she said, "but God saw. He saw. And he did. Because the woman who once had only love to give now had a life full of it in return." The village was quiet again. Chickens scratched the red soil. Old men sat beneath mango trees playing drafts. But in a corner of that sleepy place, Uncle Dominic lived in silence and shame. He had rented a tiny mud-walled room beside a run-down shop, with a roof that leaked whenever it rained, and a wooden door that creaked like a dying man's breath. Every morning he fetched water with a rusted jerry can from the community stream, his head bowed low to avoid the stares of villagers. But even when he looked up, no one greeted him. He had become a shadow, a living warning. Children whispered about him. Elders pretended not to see him. At the village square, when cola nuts were shared during meetings, no one handed any to him. He had been cut off, excommunicated not by force, but by rejection. One afternoon, while trying to buy a measure of gari, the seller, a young woman who once called him uncle, said plainly, "We don't sell to people who curse their own blood." He stood frozen for a moment, then turned and walked away, hands shaking. His heart had become a cage of regret.
Back in his small room, Dominic wrote letters, long, painful letters filled with apologies, explanations, and pleas for forgiveness. One of those letters he sent to Lagos. It arrived in a white envelope addressed simply to Ada and sisters. When Ada received it, she hesitated before opening it. They were in the living room, the family just finishing dinner. Auntie Foma was helping Nosi pick a song for Sunday worship. Chisum was sketching a new dress design.
Ada read the letter silently, then handed it to her sisters without a word. My daughters, if I may still call you that, I am writing this with a heart heavier than the shame I now carry every day. I know I wronged you. I know I cannot undo what I did. But please believe me, I was foolish. I was proud. I was wrong. I beg for your forgiveness, not because I deserve it, but because I cannot live without it. I am tired. I am alone. No one wants to speak to me, and I do not blame them. I do not ask for money or shelter. I only ask that you forgive me. Dominic. There was a long silence after Chisum finished reading it aloud. Nosy, ever soft-hearted, sighed deeply. He sounds like a man who has truly broken. Chisum shrugged. He's broken because he got caught, not because he's changed. Aunt Ifeoma, sitting quietly all along, finally spoke. Forgiveness is not for him. It's for you, so you don't carry bitterness that eats your joy. Ada nodded slowly. We will forgive him, but from a distance. He will not come back into our lives. We've healed too much to let the wound reopen. They all agreed. A letter was drafted and mailed back, short but kind. Dear Uncle Dominic, we forgive you. We pray you find peace and healing. But we are moving forward. May you also learn to live differently from now on. Ada, Chisum, Nosy. Back in the village, Dominic read the reply and wept. He held the letter to his chest and sat by the window for hours, staring out into nothing. He would never be a part of their lives again, but at least they no longer hated him. And that, in his lonely world, was a kind of mercy. Meanwhile, in Lagos, life blossomed like never before. Aunt Ifeoma became a beloved matriarch, known in the community for her story and her strength. She often sat on the veranda, watching her grandchildren play while her daughters bustled through their successful lives. One Sunday, Ada was invited to speak at a televised women's leadership conference. The hall was filled with dignitaries and young girls eager to learn. She stood at the podium, wearing a tailored blue blazer, her voice steady. My sisters and I were thrown out because we were girls. People said we had no inheritance. But today, we've built more than just wealth. We've built a legacy. And we owe everything to the woman who took us in when no one else would. She looked down at the front row, where Aunt Ifeoma sat in her head wrap and gold-trimmed lace, wiping tears from her eyes. She is our mother, and this victory is hers too. The crisp London morning was a reminder of how far Ada had come. As she stepped out of her private office, tucked inside one of the city's renowned medical consultancy buildings, her staff rose to greet her. She had just concluded a session with a high-profile client, a Nigerian senator's wife who flew in for medical advice. Ada wasn't just a nurse anymore. She was a global name in healthcare consulting, offering wellness programs for elite women across Europe and Africa. And to think, 10 years ago, she was scrubbing toilets in Nsukka just to survive. Back then, rejection had burned like fire in her chest. Uncle Dominic's words still echoed sometimes. You're just girls. You have no place here. But here she stood, in heels worth more than he probably earned in a year, with a medical degree, global influence, and a heart still beating with purpose. But success hadn't made her forget where she came from. One of her proudest projects was a health outreach initiative she started in Nigeria called Nurse for the Village, a free clinic program for pregnant women and children in underdeveloped areas. It was during one of these trips to Abuja that fate wrote the next chapter of her life. He was tall, clean-cut, and soft-spoken,
Victor, a UK-based trauma surgeon volunteering with her team, caught her attention the moment he introduced himself. But it wasn't his profession that got to her. It was the way he treated patients. The way he looked at a crying mother with compassion, how he lifted a sick toddler in his arms without hesitation. He had no idea who Ada was. He wasn't interested in her fame, her designer shoes, or her SUV. He was interested in her heart. Their connection grew quickly. Conversations stretched late into the night after outreach days. He shared stories of his childhood, losing his own mother to childbirth because of poor medical care. Ada shared hers, minus the bitterness. She didn't talk about Uncle Dominic much, but when Victor learned, his admiration for her only deepened. A year later, under the open skies of Cape Town, with Table Mountain casting its majestic shadow behind them, Ada and Victor exchanged vows in an elegant beachside ceremony. The guest list was intimate: family, friends, and mentors. Chisom designed her gown, and Nosi sang her down the aisle with a soul-stirring gospel medley that left everyone in tears. But there was one name missing on every invitation: Uncle Dominic. Not a single call was made to him, not one word. And it wasn't out of hatred. It was because Ada had long learned that some people choose to exile themselves from grace, that sometimes the past belongs in the past. The wedding made headlines in Nigerian magazines and medical journals. When two angels heal the world, Nurse Ada and Dr. Victor tie the knot. Social media buzzed with admiration, especially from young girls who followed Ada's story online. Back in the village, Uncle Dominic first heard about the wedding from a yam seller at the market. "Dominic, did you hear? That's your niece, Ada, the big nurse from London, married a doctor. Ah, the wedding was in Cape Town. I saw pictures on Facebook." He didn't respond. His jaw clenched and he turned away without a word. But when he got home, he locked himself in his room. No one saw him for 3 days. Ada didn't know this, and even if she did, it wouldn't have changed the thing. She was now Ada Nwoke Victor, a name she wore with pride. Her husband adored her, his family embraced her, and her future stretched wide with possibility. Weeks after the wedding, the couple returned to London to settle into their new life. But Ada hadn't forgotten her roots. She sent her outreach team back to Nsukka with supplies, and Aunt Ifeoma received a brand new fridge, school fees for all 5 of her children, and a letter. "You took us in when the world turned its back. Today, we want the world to never turn its back on you again." Ada had no plans to return to that old house where her uncle once spat venom at her. Her home was now filled with peace, with purpose, with love. And as she stood beside Victor on their balcony one evening, watching the London skyline flicker to life, she smiled and whispered to herself, "If only Daddy could see us now." While Ada found healing in stethoscopes and hospital wards, Chisor's sanctuary had always been the sound of a sewing machine and the scent of fresh fabric. Long before success ever knocked on her door, she used to sit by a broken singer machine in Aunt Ifeoma's small parlor, stitching clothes for neighbors who could only pay with Gary or secondhand shoes. But she stitched anyway, not for money, but for hope. In those days, Chisom barely spoke unless she had to. She let her hands do the talking. Her quietness was often misunderstood for weakness, but inside her burned a fierce determination to prove that what the world tossed aside could still shine again. And shine she did. After years of sewing non-stop and watching YouTube tutorials late into the night, Chisom began posting pictures of her designs online. Her styles, modest, elegant, and proudly African, started attracting attention. But her true breakthrough came the day she entered a Lagos fashion competition under the brand name Chissy Couture. She was up against designers who had studied in Paris, Milan, and New York. She had only the humble lessons from Aunt Ifeoma and the grit of survival. While others flaunted feathers and metallics, Chisom unveiled a collection titled From Ashes to Gold. It told the story of 3 sisters rising from rejection to glory, each outfit layered with emotion, heritage, and style. When the final model stepped onto the runway wearing a hand-woven gown embedded with recycled beads from Nsuka's village market, the audience went silent. Then came the standing ovation. The judges, including 2 international fashion editors, declared her the undisputed winner. Overnight, Chissy Couture became the talk of fashion blogs and magazines. Orders poured in, celebrity stylists called, investors offered deals. But Chisum remained grounded. She opened a flagship store in Lekki and hired young tailors from poor communities, training them to become designers. She told them, if you have thread and belief, you already have power. In her second year of success, during a charity fashion gala in Ghana, Chisum met Sunde, a soft-spoken tech entrepreneur who owned a fashion logistics startup. He had followed her story online and was instantly drawn to her purpose-driven life. Unlike other men who were intimidated by her quiet elegance and rising fame, Tunde admired her vision. They became friends first. He would visit her workshop just to watch her draw. She would test her sketches by showing them to him before anyone else. He called her Queen of Lines because of her signature flowing silhouettes. Over time, their friendship turned to love. Not the noisy kind, but the patient, deep kind that didn't need grand declarations to feel real. Tunde proposed on the 3rd anniversary of Chissy Couture with a custom ring he designed himself, shaped like a needle piercing a golden heart. Because you healed so many wounds with your thread, he told her. Their wedding took place in Abuja at the National Arts Theatre, surrounded by Chisum's signature designs and attended by Nigeria's creative elite. Her gown was, of course, her own creation. An ivory blend of satin and lace that paid tribute to her late father and Aunt Ifeoma. Nosi sang again, this time with a live orchestra, and Ada gave a heartfelt toast.
Just like Ada's wedding, Uncle Dominic was not invited. But that didn't stop the news from reaching him. An Okada writer brought a magazine to his compound, laughing as he showed the wedding photos to his fellow villagers. Ah, Dominic, your niece Damari Abuja big man, oh? See her fashion show for TV last week. Even First Lady wear her cloth. Uncle Dominic slammed the door shut, but inside his hut he wept. This time, not out of anger, but regret. The girl he once dismissed as just another burden was now dressing governors' wives and building schools for orphans, and she hadn't even looked back once. Chisum, meanwhile, moved into her new home in Maitama, Abuja. It wasn't the size of her success that made her proud. It was the lives she changed along the way. Her workshop now trained over 30 young girls, many of whom had once lived on the streets. One evening, as she stood in her garden, holding Tunde's hand and watching the sunset paint the sky in strokes of gold and lilac, she thought of her sisters, of the days they used to cry in silence, huddled under Auntie Fiona's leaking roof. Now they were women of substance, women of impact, and their journey wasn't even over yet. They used to tease her for singing to the chickens behind Auntie Fioma's house. "Nosy, go and fetch water," her sisters would shout, only to find her humming with her eyes closed, barefoot in the dusty backyard, as if the entire world was her stage. Even when hunger clawed at their bellies, Nosy's voice never lost its strength. It only grew more powerful. While Ada found purpose in medicine and Chisum stitched her way to success, Nosy found her calling in sound. As the youngest of the three, she was often shielded from the harshest moments, but she remembered everything. Uncle Dominic throwing their clothes into the streets, their long walk to Nsuka, and Auntie Fioma's sacrifices. Her emotions lived in her voice. By 16, Nosy had joined a local church choir. The church couldn't afford good microphones or a working keyboard, but people came just to hear her sing. Her voice had this way of stopping even the rowdiest children in their tracks. Some said it was angelic, others said it was haunting, but everyone agreed it was unforgettable. It was during a regional gospel concert in Ngugu that fate decided to whisper her name. Nosy sang an original piece titled "I Rise Because You Carried Me," a heartfelt tribute to Auntie Fioma and her sisters. The performance moved the crowd to tears, including a visiting music producer named Mr. Rex Okoye, known for discovering raw talent in remote corners of the country.
After the show, he approached her backstage. "Young lady," he said, struggling to hold back emotion, "your voice will shake nations. Let me help you tell your story." And so began Nosey's ascent. Not fast, but steady. She moved to Lagos under Mr. Rex's mentorship, recorded her debut single, and slowly built a fan base with her raw, soulful gospel. Unlike other upcoming artists desperate for fame, Nosey refused to alter her style to suit trends. Her message was always clear: faith, family, forgiveness. Her breakout moment came during a live gospel night aired across Africa. Dressed in a flowing white gown, she sang "We're Not Forgotten," and the entire hall stood still. Even the cameras paused, focusing on her tear-filled eyes as she sang, "We were thrown away like dust, but God used us to write a story of gold." The song went viral overnight, not just in Nigeria, but across Ghana, Kenya, South Africa, and even the UK. Churches began inviting her. Her songs played at weddings, funerals, and political gatherings. People who had never met her cried when they heard her sing. With the rise came more responsibilities. Nosey founded the Carriers Foundation, named after her most famous lyric. The NGO provided scholarships to girls from rural villages and offered counseling services to orphan children.
She also met Michael Eze, a gentle-spirited documentary filmmaker who had lost both parents young and connected deeply with Nosey's story. He was filming a series about gospel musicians who rose from hardship and insisted that Nosey's story deserved more than an album. It needed to be told on screen. Their bond grew beyond interviews and late-night editing sessions. Michael understood her silences. He didn't try to fix her, he simply held space for her to be. He once told her, "You don't have to perform for love, Nosey. Just sing, and I'll be here." They got married at a private beachside chapel in Lagos, surrounded by loved ones and supporters from across Africa. Nosey walked down the aisle to her own live performance of "He Called Me His Own," holding back tears. Ada stood by her as maid of honor, Chisholm designed her gown, and Michael filmed their first dance. Uncle Dominic was not there. He had, of course, heard about the wedding. Everyone in Enugu had. The local vendor who once insulted the girls for not affording meat now bragged that he once knew the famous singer girl when she lived in Nsukka. Even the local church replayed her wedding song during service. But for Uncle Dominic, it was another bitter echo in the chambers of his regret. Each of the girls had now risen, and not only had they had risen without him. He sat alone on the same porch where he had once smoked and laughed while throwing them out. He watched ants crawl across his cracked sandals. And in the background, from a neighbor's radio, Nosey's voice played once again. "I was the stone you cast away, but look how the builder chose me anyway." Tears filled his eyes, not because he was proud, but because he was completely forgotten. Not even an invitation, not even a mention. And as Nosey boarded a flight to London for her first international concert, hand in hand with Michael, her thoughts turned once again to Auntie Ifeoma, the woman who had believed in their dreams when they had nothing, the true builder behind their miracle. And this was just the beginning. Uncle Dominic sat on a wooden stool outside a crumbling mud house in the remote village of Umweze, far from the city lights and prideful estates he once called his own. The once proud man who had thrown his nieces into the streets now lived as a shadow among villagers who wanted nothing to do with him. His skin had darkened from too much sun, his clothes were often wrinkled and torn, and his eyes had become hollow, always scanning the horizon as though searching for redemption. He had lost the mansion years ago, not through theft or betrayal, but by the simple truth of justice. The original will, discovered and presented by the girl's lawyer, had made it clear. Their late father intended for his daughters to inherit the property. Once the legal case was settled, the mansion that once echoed with Uncle Dominic's authority was reclaimed by the rightful heirs. He had packed his bags quietly, without protest, and left the premises as the villagers looked on. Some laughed, others simply turned away. There was no sympathy for a man who had taken joy in the misfortune of orphans. His own kinsmen had excommunicated him,
calling him a disgrace to the family lineage. "You cast out your brother's children for being girls," one elder had spat at him, "and now the gods have cast you out in return." His days in Umweze were filled with silence and murmurs. The villagers avoided him. The children whispered stories of the evil uncle who once owned a mansion but now can't afford to repair his leaking roof. Dominic tried to hold on to whatever dignity he had left, but even that faded with time. What made it worse, what tore his heart in two, was the news that always seemed to find its way to him.
First, it was Ada's wedding. The eldest girl, now a respected nurse in London, had married a UK-based Nigerian doctor. The villagers gathered at a neighbor's house to watch clips of the events on Facebook. Dominic had sat nearby, pretending not to watch, but every sound pierced his heart like a blade. Then came Chisholm's story in the local newspaper. Her fashion label had been featured for designing outfits for foreign dignitaries during an international event in Abuja. The girls from Umeyize who wore her dresses danced through the village in celebration, holding up banners and pictures of the once homeless fashion designer. Again, Uncle Dominic stood by, invisible, irrelevant. When Nosie's wedding happened, the final blow landed. Her song, "He Called Me His Own," played across radio stations, churches, and even at village events. It was as though the world itself had chosen to remind him of the one truth he couldn't escape. He had thrown away gold because it came wrapped in femininity. Not one of the girls sent him an invitation. No letter, no call, not even a whisper of pity. And they were right. He spent his evenings under the old mango tree, chewing dry cola nut and staring at the red sky. Sometimes he spoke aloud as though the wind could carry his words to the girls. "Forgive me, I didn't know better." But the wind never replied. There were rumors that Aunt Ifeoma had offered to send him money once, but the girls refused. "He must drink the cup he poured for us," Ada had said. One morning, an old villager passing by saw Dominic sobbing quietly with his face buried in his palms. When asked what was wrong, he simply replied, "I used to be a man who had everything. Now, I'm not even a memory worth keeping." That day, the church bell rang for evening prayers, and the choir began rehearsing for Sunday service. The final sting came when the choir sang one of Nosie's most famous songs. It echoed through the village as Dominic walked back to his hut. What they broke, he made whole. What they threw away, he raised on gold. And as the melody drifted into the evening breeze, Uncle Dominic shut the creaking door behind him. Not even the insects sang with him. Only silence remained. His name would never appear in their wedding albums, not in their dedications, not in their future stories. He was a chapter they had turned, but never needed to reread. Dominic, once the feared uncle in Enugu, now lived and died in the shadow of his own mistakes. Forgotten, rejected, alone. And that, perhaps, was the justice life had reserved for him. Uncle Dominic sat hunched in the shadow of his leaking thatched hut at the edge of Umuaku village, coughing violently into a threadbare cloth. The man who once commanded a mansion and chased his late brother's daughters into the streets now looked like a ghost of himself. His back was bent, his clothes torn and reeking of damp sweat and hopelessness, and his food came only when a kind neighbor remembered he still existed. The villagers avoided him like a curse. Mothers warned their children, "Do not go near Dominic's hut. He brought shame to his lineage." He was no longer welcome at village meetings, not even at burials or festivals. His kinsmen, ashamed of his wickedness, had excommunicated him. And worst of all, no one dared to speak his name unless in scorn or pity. It was a cruel fate, but one he earned. Every day he heard whispers of the girl's achievements. Ada, now a renowned nurse in London, had just opened a clinic in Enugu to provide free healthcare for widows and orphans. Chisholm's fashion brand had gone global. Her designs were being worn by TV stars and dignitaries. Nosie, the youngest, had become a gospel singer with millions of streams and was touring cities across Nigeria.
Their names echoed from every radio station and every market square like a trumpet of judgment. He couldn't escape it. Each time he heard, his heart twisted. What haunted him the most was not just their success, but their silence. They had not once mentioned his name in public. They had not come to mock him. They had simply moved on. Worse still, when each of the girls got married, one after another, the entire village knew. But he didn't receive a single invitation, not even a mention. He first heard of Ada's wedding from Mama Nkechi, who returned from the city. And Dominic, you should have seen the wedding. Ha! Ada's husband is a doctor like her. You should have seen the convoy, 24 cars, and they even flew to Dubai for honeymoon. Chisam's came next, a glamorous affair that made the front page of Niger Style magazine. And Nosy, the smallest of them all? She married a tech entrepreneur who built her a recording studio as a wedding gift. At each wedding, he sat alone in his hut, listening to the faint echoes of music and fireworks from someone's transistor radio. No one came to call him. No one sent him a souvenir. The same girls he had thrown out like stray dogs now had the entire village at their feet. One evening, Dominic staggered out of his hut and wandered to the village square. He saw a group of young boys laughing and imitating Nosy's song. "She's now richer than the governor," one boy boasted. Another added, "And to think she once slept on the floor of Aunt Ifoma's one-room house." Dominic turned back slowly, his heart heavy, his eyes wet. Inside his hut that night, he stared at the smoke-stained ceiling and whispered to no one, "It should have been me in that mansion. That house was mine. They stole it." But deep down, he knew the truth. He had stolen their childhood. He had tried to bury their dreams. He had mocked them when they cried and shut the door on them after their father's burial. He never imagined they would survive, let alone soar. Now, all he had was an old, rusted kettle, torn mats, and his bitter memories. But something inside him had begun to twist. A voice, low and poisonous, began to whisper, "They forgot you. They shamed you. And yet, you are still breathing. Do something."
That night, Dominic tossed and turned. The darkness in his mind deepened. The spirit of regret had done his job. Now envy had taken his place. He clenched his teeth and whispered aloud, "If I can't rise, then let them fall." And that was the beginning of a dangerous thought, one that would push him to take a path so dark it would drag him beyond the point of return. The next morning, long before the village rooster crowed, Uncle Dominic stood at the edge of the dense forest path leading to Umuagu, a village whispered to harbor the old ways, witches, seers, and secret shrines. His slippers were worn to the heel, his walking stick trembled in his grip, and his breath came in dry wheezes. But his mind was set. He had not told a soul. He didn't need to. His decision was between himself and the spirits that haunted his bitter heart. The road was thick with silence. Twigs snapped under his feet as he made his way deeper into the woods. Owls hooted from trees above, and the rustle of unseen animals trailed him like ghosts. Still, he walked, because all he could see, behind his tired eyes, were the images of Ada, Chisum, and Nosy, radiant in white gowns, standing in the same compound he once owned. How dare they? How dare those girls shine after all he did to destroy them? After nearly 2 hours, he arrived at a crooked compound hidden beneath tall palm trees. The gates were made from bones tied together with palm fronds, and an eerie red cloth fluttered above the entrance. Dominic hesitated for a moment, but the darkness within him pushed him forward. A hunched old woman sat at the threshold, her skin dry and wrinkled like old bark. She had no teeth, but her smile sent chills through his spine. "You no reach," she croaked. "Dem den tell me say you dey come." Dominic blinked. "You know me?" The woman laughed.
I no need know you. I know your heart. It they smell revenge. She turned and beckoned. Follow me. Inside, the air was thick with smoke and strange herbs. Strange symbols were drawn across the mud walls in chalk and charcoal. Clay pots bubbled with dark mixtures, and the head of a goat hung above the doorway, flies buzzing around it. Dominic cleared his throat. I want them to suffer. Which them? The woman asked, crouching near a fire. My nieces, Ada, Chisum, Nosi. I want their joy to dry up, their light to dim. Let everything they touch turn to pain. The old woman didn't flinch. She picked up a wooden bowl and began to stir something dark and sticky. You be strong man for your time, but them girls, them carry favor way past ordinary. Their blood carry light. It go cost you plenty. Dominic nodded. Anything. I'm ready to pay. The woman's eyes gleamed. Even your own peace? He hesitated. She leaned forward. You no fit pluck star from sky without paying with your own breath. Dominic clenched his fists. I said I'm ready. She grinned and tossed black powder into the flames. It flared green, then red, then died into smoke. She brought out 3 white dolls, each marked with a symbol and wrapped in pieces of lace cloth. These be they spirits, she whispered. We gon' tie they path. We gon' scatter they dreams. But once I begin, you no fit turn back. Your soul go be the road where the affliction go follow. Dominic took a shaky breath and nodded. With chants rising from her cracked lips, the old woman dipped the dolls in blood and smeared ash over them. One by one, she bound their eyes with thread, tied their hands, and pushed pins into their hearts. Then she turned to Dominic. It is done. Go home and watch. But remember, every time they cry, your bones go feel the pain. That is your price. Dominic left in silence, his heart pounding not with fear, but with twisted satisfaction.
Back in his hut that night, thunder cracked across the sky. Rain poured like the heavens were trying to wash away something evil. Dominic sat in the dark, staring at the wall. And then it began. A sudden wind blew open his window. His lantern shattered without warning, and a distant voice echoed in the rain, like a girl's cry, soft and haunting. He smiled. The next morning, as Ada prepared to speak at a medical conference in Abuja, her voice suddenly failed. No sound came out of her mouth. Chisum woke up to find all her fabrics soaked in black oil. Every single design she had prepared for her international runway was ruined. And Nosy, just as she stepped on stage at her concert in Port Harcourt, the lights cut. Her microphone sparked. Panic filled the venue. A crew member collapsed. It was chaos. Each of them paused, stunned, confused, and shaken. But this was just the beginning. The winds in Suka had never blown as fiercely as they did that week. The villagers whispered. Birds stopped singing. Dogs howled without cause. Even the elders who normally sat under the big mango tree refused to gather. Something wasn't right. The girls, Ada, Chisum, and Nosy, had gone quiet. And those who knew their story sensed that something unnatural was beginning to circle them. Ada hadn't left her apartment in Abuja for 3 days. She sat by her bed, her stethoscope abandoned, the papers from the conference scattered on the floor. Her voice had still not returned. She had visited 3 hospitals, spoken to specialists, even done blood work. All results came back normal. Yet she could not utter a single word. Her phone rang. It was Chisum. Ada, Chisum's voice trembled through the speaker. My store caught fire. Everything is gone. Ada gasped silently, clutching the phone tighter. I don't know what happened. I went out to get thread and came back to smoke and flames. The fire service said it was electrical, but there was no light that morning. Ada shook her head and tried to whisper a prayer, but not even a breath came out.
Later that night, Nosy called. She had returned from her concert in Port Harcourt, traumatized. "I was almost electrocuted, Ada," she cried. "The light sparked out of nowhere. The stage manager collapsed. I haven't been able to sleep. I'm scared." Ada tried to speak, but only silence answered. So she texted, "We need to go home. Back to Nsuka. Something is wrong." 2 days later, all three sisters sat in Aunt Ifoma's living room. The air was heavy. Their aunt paced the floor, tying and retying her headscarf, her face contorted with fear. "This is not ordinary," she finally said. "Something is pursuing you girls. This is spiritual. I've had dreams, terrible ones. Last night, I saw your uncle, Dominic, standing barefoot in a river, throwing stones at your shadows. Each stone made you scream." The room went cold. "Auntie, do you think he's behind this?" Chisholm asked quietly. "I know he is," Ifoma whispered. "I warned you girls after the wedding. That man carries bitterness like poison. When you refused to press charges or disgrace him, I knew he wouldn't let go." Ada wrote in her journal and passed it to them. "Then we must fight back, not with bitterness, but with truth and God. We didn't come this far to lose." They prayed through the night. No food, no distractions, just scriptures, songs, and weeping. At midnight, as they cried out for help, the candles flickered wildly. Nosy stopped singing. She looked toward the window. A strange shadow passed outside. "Did anyone see that?" she whispered. Chisholm jumped up and bolted the door. Suddenly, Ada clutched her throat. Her hands trembled. She tried again to speak, and this time a whisper came out. "He's watching." They stared at her. Her voice, hoarse and cracked, had returned. "What did you say?" Aunt Ifoma asked. Ada looked toward the window, tears in her eyes. "Uncle Dominic, he's watching us, through something, or someone. I could feel it."
The next morning, Aunt Ifeoma left early and traveled to a neighboring village, seeking an elderly woman known as Mamancheta, a prayerful prophetess who once helped the community many years ago. Mamancheta listened patiently and closed her eyes. The girls are under a curse sent from the blood of the bitter. But his evil is borrowed. It does not come from him. It comes from something he paid dearly for. "What can we do?" Aunt Ifeoma asked. "You must break it with truth. Find the source. Return what was taken." Aunt Ifeoma frowned. "Return?" Mamancheta leaned in. "There is something the girls own that he still hides, something tied to their father. When you recover it and lay it before the altar, his spell will shatter." Back in the sukkah, Ada sat alone outside, her voice fully restored, humming softly. She stared up at the sky. "We won't run anymore," she said. "We were never the victims. We are the light." That night, for the first time since the curse began, Uncle Dominic woke up screaming. His room was flooded with rats, hundreds of them, biting, scratching, crawling over him. He fought them off, flailing and crying, only to find himself alone. No rats, no blood, just silence. He sat up, drenched in sweat, breathing heavily. The old woman's voice echoed in his head. "Every time they cry, your bones go feel the pain." And for the first time, Dominic felt fear, real fear. Because deep inside, something told him the girls were coming. Uncle Dominic could no longer sleep. Each time he closed his eyes, the same nightmare returned. Ada stood at the edge of a river, her eyes glowing like fire. Behind her were Chisam and Nosi, dressed in white, singing a song that pierced his ears like thunder. Then something would rise from the water, a shadowed figure with outstretched arms, and whisper one word: return. His skin would crawl, his bones would ache, and he'd wake up soaked in sweat, gasping, scratching invisible itches all over his body. The medicine from the native doctor no longer worked. The charm buried under his bed now gave off a foul stench.
He hadn't eaten in 3 days. The people in the compound avoided him. Even the birds stopped landing on his windowsill. Then came the night that broke him. It started with a pounding at his door. Not the sound of fists, but of unseen forces shaking his very walls. He stumbled out of bed, heart racing, and opened the door. Nothing, only silence and wind. But when he turned back into his room, he froze. The girls were there. Not physically, but in visions. Their childhood laughter echoed through the walls. Their little feet patted against the floor. The sound of them running to him as children, calling him Uncle Dom, rang in his ears. But now it felt like torment, like mockery. He fell to his knees and screamed, "I didn't mean to hurt you." That was when his neighbors rushed in. "Uncle Dominic, what is it? Who are you shouting at?" a woman asked. He turned to them, his eyes sunken, lips dry. "I cursed them. I cursed my own blood." They exchanged glances. "What are you saying?" He dropped to the floor and began to weep like a child. "I went to a witch doctor. I couldn't stand their joy, their success. After they took back that house, I swore they would never be happy again. I paid money. I used their father's clothes. I gave their names. I watched as they suffered from afar. But it has turned against me. I see them in my dreams. I can't eat. I can't sleep." The room went still. "Wait," one man stepped forward. "You mean the 3 girls you threw out after their father died? The ones now doing well in Abuja, Lagos, and Port Harcourt?" Uncle Dominic nodded. "Yes, I did it. I've become what I never thought I'd be, an enemy to my own bloodline." By the next morning, the entire village had heard. The elders gathered under the Iroko tree. Some of them had known Dominic's late brother, the girl's father. Many were shocked. Others were not surprised. "This is why we say, the heart of bitterness breeds madness," Chief Namdi muttered. When Uncle Dominic was summoned before the village, he looked like a shadow of his former self. His white singlet hung loose, his eyes were red from tears, and his feet shook with every step. He confessed everything. From the jealousy he felt after the girls rose to success, to the shrine he visited in secret, to the cursed powder he paid to have scattered at Chisom's shop, and the charm buried behind Nosey's concert hall. He cried as he spoke. "I am a disgrace," he sobbed. "I deserve no forgiveness." The elders did not speak for a long time. Then the oldest among them stood and addressed the crowd. "A man who turns his back on his own blood is not fit to sit among us. Uncle Dominic, you are hereby excommunicated from this community. You are to leave the village before sunset. You will not return forever. Let the spirits you invited go with you. We cleanse our hands from your evil." There was no debate. Dominic tried to beg, but the villagers turned their backs on him. One by one. Even the smallest child looked away. By noon, he was seen packing what little he owned into a wheelbarrow and pushing it toward the road that led to the hills. He disappeared that same day. As for Ada, Chisom, and Nosy, peace returned like morning light. The curse lifted. Ada's voice was strong again. She returned to her hospital in Abuja. Chisom received donations and support from local designers to rebuild her fashion studio. Nosy sang again, and this time her voice carried more power than ever before. One Sunday afternoon, they all returned to Nuska. This time, not as helpless girls, but as women of grace and glory. The villagers welcomed them with open arms. The drums beat. Aunt Ifeoma cried as she held them. "You didn't just survive," she said, smiling. "You conquered." They had come full circle. And though the pain had left scars, their hearts were stronger, their spirits wiser. What was stolen had been returned. What was cursed had been reversed. But most of all, what was meant to destroy them had only made them unbreakable. Uncle Dominic had once ruled that mansion in Enugu like a lion. He walked through its marble corridors as if he owned the sun itself. But now, that memory was no longer his to keep. Banished from the village with disgrace hanging around his neck like a rotten chain, Dominic wandered to a forgotten settlement miles away from Nuska. There, at the edge of a dying town, he found an abandoned mud hut that even rodents had rejected. That became his new kingdom. The villagers of that small town heard whispers about him. That's the man who cursed his own blood, the one that lost everything to 3 girls. Children would point at him as he limped past, mumbling to himself, clothes torn, his once clean skin now caked with dust and filth. Nobody offered him food, nobody cared. Dominic had grown thinner than a broomstick. His eyes were sunken, beard unkempt, and his lips cracked from days without proper water. In the beginning, he tried to stay hidden, but the guilt inside him was like a ticking bomb. Each night, he would jolt awake screaming, "Ada, please forgive me," or "I didn't mean it, Nosi, I was trying to protect our legacy." The people in the village called him a madman. Some said he was cursed. Others said the spirits of the land were punishing him for what he did to his late brother's daughters. Either way, no one came close. Dominic tried to earn forgiveness from the world in strange ways. He stood outside churches on Sunday mornings, bowing and begging people to pray for him. Some spat at his feet, some ignored him entirely. But it was the children who hurt him the most. They threw stones at his roof and mocked him with songs. "Uncle without a name, your greed brought you shame." On one painful afternoon, Dominic sat under the dying shade of a pawpaw tree beside his hut. His legs trembled from hunger. His lips whispered a prayer. Not to God. He had long stopped believing in forgiveness. He prayed to the air, to the spirits, to the shadows of those girls he had wronged. "I was only trying to protect what I built," he murmured, rocking back and forth. "But I built it on pain. I built it with hate." But the more he confessed to the air, the more the silence condemned him. Meanwhile, the world had moved on. Ada, Chisum, and Nosi were no longer the crying girls begging for shelter. They had risen from the ashes he buried them in. London had become their new home, and their names echoed through newspapers and social media. The resilient sisters who overcame betrayal and reclaimed their dignity. Dominic followed their stories from afar, occasionally hearing news from distant voices in the town square. It wasn't the fame that hurt him. It was the fact that they had become everything he told them they could never be. He once called them useless. The world now called them inspirational. At night, he would stare at the ceiling of his leaking roof and scream into the darkness. "What do they have that I don't? Why did I end up here?" But no voice answered. Only the wind, whistling through the holes in the mud wall, echoed back his pain. The worst part was the loneliness. Even his kinsmen from the village never visited. Word had gone round that anyone who associated with Dominic would face the wrath of the gods. That's how much damage his past had caused. He was no longer a man. He was a warning. He tried writing a letter once, shaky handwriting on torn paper. It was addressed to the girls. But as he finished the last line, he looked at it and something inside him snapped. He tore it to pieces and fed it to the fire. "I deserve this," he whispered. By the end of the month, Dominic had become a ghost. Not dead, but invisible. He would sit on a stool outside, eyes glazed over, watching the road like a man waiting for a death that refused to come. The villagers said they heard him before they saw him. At first, it was soft humming, eerie, off-key melodies that floated from the forest edge near the abandoned hut. Then came the laughter, wild, broken laughter that sent children running and left even the goats restless. Some said it was the cry of a tortured soul. Others were convinced Dominic had finally snapped. And they were right. After weeks of isolation, hunger, and guilt, Uncle Dominic's mind began to rot like a forgotten wound. He no longer recognized the date or time. He spoke to walls. He shouted at birds. Sometimes he screamed the names of the girls, Ada, Chisum, Nosi, as though they were still little, still in the mansion, still listening. But they weren't. They had moved on. The world had embraced them while he withered in silence. And that truth, sharp and bitter, was what broke him. One afternoon, a group of boys dared each other to go near his hut. They peeked through a cracked window and froze. Dominic sat in the middle of the room, fully naked, holding a wooden stick like a microphone. He was singing to empty chairs, pretending to host a family dinner. Chisum, pass the rice. Nosi, come and taste this goat meat. Ada, oh Ada, don't cry again. Uncle is here now. Then he paused. His eyes slowly turned toward the window, unblinking. The boys ran. One peed on himself. That day, the village agreed. Dominic had lost his mind. The madness took full control. He stopped bathing. His hair grew wild. His beard curled into knots. His body stank of waste and dry tears. Some mornings he would be seen running along the dusty road, chasing things no one else could see. Other days he'd sit under the sun and talk to a stone as if it were his late brother. "You gave birth to girls," he'd say, weeping. "I told you it would be a curse. I tried to protect your legacy. I tried, but they destroyed me instead." The stone never answered. But the worst was the nightmares. Every night he woke up screaming. In his dreams, Ada would appear, not as a child, but as a grown woman, pointing at him with fire in her eyes. "You took our home," she'd yell. Chisum would sew his mouth shut with a needle made of thorns. Nosi would sing a gospel tune that echoed like judgment through the dream. Dominic would wake up drenched in sweat, clawing at his own chest. The few villagers who still lived nearby started burning incense and sprinkling salt around their homes. "He's possessed," they whispered. "The spirits of the girl's ancestors have risen." One desperate morning, Dominic wandered into the market square, holding a dead chicken and shouting, "I've brought sacrifice! Let them leave me alone!" Market women screamed, people threw stones. He fled, slipping in the mud, his lips bleeding, still laughing. That night, under the same pawpaw tree where he once sat begging for forgiveness, Dominic did something that even shocked the spirits.
He pulled out an old knife, rusted and dull, from beneath a cracked stool. The knife had once belonged to his late brother. It was meant for farming, for feeding, but in his mad hands it had become something else entirely. He looked to the sky. It was quiet, too quiet. "Maybe this is the only way," he whispered. "Maybe the girls will be free. Maybe I'll finally sleep." But he couldn't go through with it. Instead, he staggered into the bush and collapsed by the riverbank. There, in his sleep, he muttered his final confession to the moon. "I never hated them. I only hated how they reminded me of what I never became." That night, as lightning flashed across the sky, Dominic woke up screaming. But this time, there was no one to hear it. His voice echoed into the forest, into the ears of ghosts, into the arms of madness. And by morning, he had vanished. The air was strangely still that morning. A faint mist clung to the ground around the village stream, casting soft shadows through the trees. The birds that usually chirped and filled the forest with life were unusually silent. Even the rustling leaves seemed reluctant to move. It was as if nature itself was holding its breath. Mama Ejide, a middle-aged woman with a scarf tied tightly around her head, stepped out of her compound carrying her water pot. Her wrapper was faded from years of washing, and her feet were calloused from the countless trips to the stream. She walked the familiar path with the same rhythm she had used for decades. Step, step, adjust the pot, step. As she approached the bend near the large iroko tree, the one villagers often avoided at night, she paused. Something didn't feel right. The path felt colder. Her heart quickened, but she shook off the unease. She pressed forward. That was when she saw it. At first, it looked like a large sack dangling from one of the thick branches. But then her eyes adjusted to the dim light filtering through the trees. It wasn't a sack. It
was a man. A rope dug into his neck, swaying slightly with the morning breeze. His feet hung lifelessly in the air. His arms, limp and pale, pointed downward. His tongue was swollen. His face was drained of all color. But she recognized him immediately. "Jesus!" she screamed, dropping her pot, which shattered on the rocks below. "Uncle Dominic!" She staggered backward, unable to pull her eyes away. For a moment, she thought maybe her mind was playing tricks on her. Maybe it wasn't him. But the worn slippers at the base of the tree were his. The torn brown shirt clinging to his chest, that was his too. The madness had ended. The man who had once been feared, then pitied, had finally taken his final step. Her scream echoed through the valley. Within minutes, the village erupted in chaos. People poured out of their homes and shops, rushing toward the stream. They came with sticks, with cutlasses, with cell phones. Children were ushered back into compounds as the elders arrived. Some gasped, some crossed themselves, others stood in silence. The village chief arrived with 2 young men who were tasked with bringing down the body. It took time. The rope had been tied tightly. Clearly, this wasn't a moment of impulse. Dominic had planned it. Every knot, every position, every detail. When his body was finally lowered, it landed with a heavy thud. People stepped back. No one wanted to touch him. Not out of fear of death, but because they didn't know what to feel.
The man who had once driven his brother's daughters into the streets. The man who had laughed when little Nosy begged to stay. The man who burned the girls' inheritance and sold off their clothes, calling them useless children. That man was now lying cold beneath the tree, his face frozen in a grimace of pain and surrender. The elders gathered for an emergency meeting under the village square. There were debates on whether he should be buried in the village at all. Some said he should be thrown into the forest for the vultures. Others, more merciful, insisted on a quiet burial outside the village walls. No ceremony, no drums, no procession. By evening, a shallow grave was dug near the edge of the stream. No family came forward to claim him. No kinsman wept. Only Mama Ejide stood at a distance, her scarf pulled over her face, watching as 2 men covered the lifeless body with dry soil. One of them muttered, "May his soul find peace, if that's still possible." The other shrugged, "Let this be a warning." As the last heap of earth was placed, thunder rumbled faintly in the distance, though the sky was still clear. And just like that, the story of Uncle Dominic came to an end. Not with justice, not with forgiveness, but with silence and shame. The mansion he once stole had been reclaimed. The girls he once threw away had risen beyond what anyone imagined. And he, once the feared man of the family, was now just a name whispered with pity and caution. The village slowly returned to life, but that tree, that cursed Iroko tree, would never be the same. Mothers would point at it and tell their children, "That's where greed met its bitter end."